The lecture hall on Valith Prime was full that morning, and every seat was taken by students from across the galaxy who had come to study the most dangerous chemicals known to science. Professor Kethvon stood at the front of the room, and his tall, thin body swayed slightly as he activated the holographic display behind him. He was a Cerivan, and his pale membrane skin glowed faintly blue. Whenever he was nervous, and today he was very nervous because today's lesson was about death, he looked at his students and took a slow breath through the slits on his neck. Today, we begin the study of Class 9. Biochemical hazards, he said, and his voice was calm but heavy. These are not ordinary chemicals. These are the substances that have ended more lives across the galaxy than any war, any plague, any natural disaster. You will learn their names. You will learn their structures. And you will learn to fear them. The room went silent in the third row. A young Palathi student named Zira pressed her claws together and opened her datapad. She was small even for her species, with a shiny dark exoskeleton and 2 long antennae that twitched every time she felt something dangerous in the air. She was brilliant, and she was always afraid, and today, both of those things would serve her well. Next to her sat Renok, a massive Dradi built like a boulder, covered in dull silver mineral plates. He was silicon-based and slow to speak, but when he did speak, people listened. He had 4 eyes, and all 4 of them were locked on the Professor. Kethvon tapped the display, and the first molecule appeared in the air, glowing red and rotating slowly. This is capsaicin, he said. It is produced by certain plant species as a defense mechanism on contact. It attacks the nerve endings of most known species. It causes burning. It causes swelling. In high concentrations, it causes complete respiratory collapse and death. The recorded lethality rate among documented sapient species is 94%. Zira made a small clicking sound with her mandibles and wrote the number down. Kethvon moved to the next molecule. This is ethanol, a simple organic compound, 2 carbon atoms, 6 hydrogen, 1 oxygen. It looks harmless. It is not. Ethanol dissolves cell membranes, disrupts neural function, and at sufficient dosage shuts down the central processing organs of nearly every carbon-based life form. It is responsible for more accidental deaths on frontier stations than explosive decompression. Rank shifted in his seat, and the stone plates on his shoulders scraped together. The professor continued, and with each new molecule, the room grew heavier. Theobromine, a cardiac toxin, acetic acid, a corrosive capable of eating through Palathi exoskeleton in minutes. Caffeine, a psychoactive stimulant that caused fatal cardiac events in 11 species. An allyl isothiocyanate, a compound found in mustard oil, which was classified as a chemical weapon on 4 member worlds. By the time Kethvon had finished, the display behind him looked like a wall of death. Every molecule was marked with the universal hazard symbol, and the students sat in the kind of silence that only comes when young people realize how fragile they really are. Zira stared at her notes, and her antennae were pressed flat against her head, which meant she was scared. Renok had not blinked in 6 minutes. Kethvon let the silence sit for a moment, and then spoke again. You will study these compounds this semester. You will handle simulations. You will run analyses, but you will never, and I want to be absolutely clear about this, you will never come into physical contact with any of them. The university has the highest safety protocols in this quadrant, and we intend to keep it that way. He paused and looked out across the hall. Any questions? No one moved. Good. Then led us the rear door of the lecture hall, hissed open. Every head turned. A human walked in. She was average height with dark hair pulled back in a messy knot, and she wore the gray and blue uniform of the Terran Integration Program. She had a bag over one shoulder, and she was smiling the kind of easy half-smile that humans made when they knew they were late but did not feel very sorry about it. Her name was Lieutenant Emma Chen, and she had arrived on Valith Prime exactly 14 hours ago. She had not slept. She had not eaten breakfast. She was starving. Sorry, she whispered as she slipped into an empty seat in the back row. Am I in the right place, Zenacum 101 Thavan? Stared at her for a long moment, and then nodded slowly. You are welcome, Lieutenant. Please take a seat. Emma sat down and dropped her bag on the desk. She glanced at the glowing red molecules on the display and raised her eyebrows, but said nothing. Then she reached into her bag. She pulled out a thermos. She pulled out a sealed container. She pulled out a small bottle with a red cap. Zira, who had turned around in her seat, watched the human with wide dark eyes. She did not know what any of those objects were, but something about them made her antennae rise straight up. Emma unscrewed the thermos, and a thin curl of steam rose into the air. The scent was dark and bitter, and it moved through the lecture hall like a slow wave 2 rows ahead. VOC student wrinkled the folds of skin around their breathing holes. Emma did not notice. She opened the sealed container next, and the smell changed. It was sharper now, warmer, and there was something underneath it, something that made Zira's antennae vibrate at a frequency she had only ever felt during hazard drills. Renok looked down at his datapad. A small yellow warning had appeared in the corner. AIR Quality Advisory, Trace Chemical Detection. In Sector Asivian, he stared at it, and then slowly turned to look at the back of the room. Emma was stirring something in her container. She lifted a pair of thin sticks and brought a tangle of something hot and steaming to her mouth. She blew on it once, and then she ate. The smell spread. Zira's antennae went rigid. She raised one trembling claw into the air. Professor, she said, and her voice was small and tight. I believe there is a chemical exposure event occurring in Sector 7 of the hall. The room froze. Ikithvon looked at Zira, then looked at the air quality panel on the wall. A small light had turned from green to amber. He looked at Emma. Emma looked back at him with noodles hanging from her mouth. The professor opened his mouth to speak. He could not find any words on the display behind him. The molecule for capsaicin still glowed red, spinning slowly in the dark, and the air in the lecture hall smelled exactly like it. The amber light on the wall turned red. Professor Kethvon had taught at this university for 32 years. He had handled unstable plasma compounds. He had supervised experiments with acids that could melt starship hulls. He had once diffused a chemical spill that nearly killed an entire floor of the biology wing, but nothing in his long career had prepared him for the sight of a young human woman calmly eating noodles in the back row of his classroom while the air quality sensors screamed, "Everyone, remain calm," he said, but his voice was not calm. His membrane skin had turned a deep blue, which meant his body was flooding with stress hormones. Zira, please describe what you were detecting. Zira stood up, and her legs were shaking. She held up a small personal scanner and read the display. I am detecting trace amounts of capsaicin in the air, she said. Concentration is low, but rising. I am also detecting acetic acid, and a compound that matches the profile of alloisothiocyanate oil. Kethvon whispered. There is also, she continued, and her voice cracked, a strong reading of caffeine vapor, consistent with a heated liquid source. Every student in the room looked at Emma. Emma had stopped chewing. She looked around the room at 50 alien faces, all staring at her with expressions that ranged from confusion to horror. She looked down at her food, then back at the professor. Is everything okay? She asked. Kethvon walked slowly down the aisle between the seats. His eyes were locked on the container in front of Emma. He moved the way someone would move toward an unexploded bomb. Lieutenant, he said very quietly. What is that? Emma looked down again. It's ramen, she said. Ramen? Yeah, it's noodles with broth and some chili flakes and a little hot sauce. I miss breakfast. So what is in the thermos? Coffee and the bottle. That's just hot sauce. Kethvon stared at the small red bottle like it was a live grenade. He turned to his teaching assistant, a young Sarivon named Peleth, who had gone completely white. Peleth scanned the items on her desk. Peleth approached with trembling hands holding a chemical analysis scanner. She waved it over the container and the thermos and the bottle, and with each scan her skin lost more color. The container, she said, and her voice was barely a whisper, contains capsaicin in significant concentration, along with acetic acid, sodium chloride, and fermented compounds consistent with ethanol residue. She moved to the thermos. The liquid contains caffeine at levels that would cause cardiac arrest in a Pahlavi within minutes. It also contains trace theobromine. She looked at the small bottle and did not want to scan it, but she did. This, she said, is concentrated capsaicin suspended in acetic acid. The concentration. As she paused and looked at Kethvan, this would be classified as a chemical weapon on 11-member worlds. The lecture hall erupted. Geology student in the second row made a high-pitched sound and collapsed sideways. 2 Pahlavi students scrambled over each other trying to reach the exit. Ranek stood up so fast his chair cracked, and his 4 eyes were wide and spinning in their sockets. Sema sat perfectly still, holding her chopsticks in the air, watching the chaos unfold around her with complete bewilderment. Advan hit the emergency panel on the wall, and a loud tone rang through the hall. Hazmat protocol, Sigma, he said into the intercom. Chemical exposure in lecture hall 9. Possible class 9 contamination source is sector 7. Requesting full response team. Emma put her chopsticks down. Wait, she said. Hang on, what is happening, Lieutenant? Kethvan said, and his voice was now the slow, careful voice of someone trying not to provoke a dangerous animal. You are in possession of multiple class 9 biochemical hazards. You have been consuming them. Do you understand what I am telling you? Emma looked at the ramen. She looked at the coffee. She looked at the hot sauce. She looked at the professor. It's lunch. She said, it is poison. Kethvan said no. It's food, Lieutenant. The compounds on your desk have a combined lethality profile that could kill everyone in this room. Emma opened her mouth and closed it again. She looked around at the students. Some were pressed against the far wall, some were watching through the glass from the hallway outside. Zira was standing on her seat with her scanner pointed at Emma like it was a shield. Oh, she said very softly. Oh no, are you serious right now? The doors burst open and campus security entered in full hazmat suits, orange visors, sealed helmets, thick gloves. They moved in formation like they were clearing a combat zone. The lead officer raised a containment scanner and pointed it at Emma. Human, he said through his suit speaker. Step away from the desk. Emma raised both hands slowly. It's just noodles, she said again. Officer looked at the readings on his scanner. He looked at the noodles. He looked at Emma. His voice came through the speaker, flat and disbelieving. The noodles are registering as a class 9 biohazard. I know what it sounds like, Emma said. But I promise you I eat this literally every day. That statement did not help. They sealed her food in a containment unit, the kind used for transporting unstable chemical samples. They put the hot sauce bottle in a separate reinforced case. The coffee thermos was handled with mechanical arms. Emma was escorted out of the lecture hall with 2 security officers on either side of her. She was not handcuffed, but the officers kept a careful distance, and they walked her through the corridors while students and faculty pressed themselves against the walls to let them pass. She still had no idea what she had done wrong. She kept looking back at the containment unit where her lunch was sealed away like nuclear waste. Back in the lecture hall, Kethvan stood at the front of the empty room. The seats were abandoned. Datapads were left behind on desks. The holographic display still showed the molecule of capsaicin rotating. In the air, Pelith stood beside him, still pale. Professor, she said, what do we do? Kethvan did not answer for a long time. He walked to the back row and stood where Emma had been sitting. There was a small stain on the desk where a drop of broth had spilled. He stared at it. She was eating it. He said quietly, yes, voluntarily. Looked at Pelith, and his membrane skin flickered between blue and gray, which meant his body did not know whether to be afraid or amazed. What kind of species, he whispered, looks at death and decides it needs more hot sauce? The University Safety Board met the next morning in a long gray room with no windows and a table shaped like a half circle. Emma sat alone on one side and 7 alien officials sat on the other, and the distance between them felt much larger than It was Emma had not slept well. The quarters they had given her were comfortable enough, but the security officer posted outside her door had made it hard to relax. She was not under arrest exactly, but she was not free to walk around either, and the difference between the two felt very thin. The head of the safety board was a Kasori named Director Volan. She was tall and narrow with smooth gray skin and 3 eyes, arranged in a triangle on her face. She looked at Emma the way a doctor looks. "At a scan that does not make sense, Lieutenant Chen," she said. "We have reviewed the chemical analysis of the items recovered from your desk in Lecture Hall 9. I want to be clear that you are not being charged with anything at this time. But we need to understand what happened." Emma nodded. "You were carrying." She paused and looked down at a datapad, a container of heated broth and grain paste, laced with capsaicin, acetic acid, allyl, isothiocyanate, and sodium chloride, a sealed flask of liquid containing caffeine at a concentration of 300 milligrams per serving, along with trace theobromine, and a small bottle of concentrated capsaicin extract in an acid suspension. Emma waited. "Is this correct?" "Yes." "You were consuming these substances willingly?" "Yes." "And you do this regularly every day?" "More or less." Director Volan looked at the other board members. One of them, a Palathi biologist, had his claws pressed against his face. Another was writing something very fast on her datapad. Lieutenant Volan said slowly, "Can you explain to us why a sapient being would deliberately ingest compounds that are lethal to nearly every known species in the galaxy?" Emma leaned forward and put her hands on the table. "Because they taste good," she said. The room did not know what to do with that answer. "Look," Emma said, "I understand this looks crazy from your side. I really do. But these substances are not dangerous to humans. They affect us, sure, but they do not kill us. We have been eating them for thousands of years, millions of years in some cases. Our species evolved alongside these chemicals on our home world. They are part of our food, our culture, our daily life." She pulled up the Terran dietary database on the room's shared display, and the board members leaned in. "This is capsaicin," she said. "Humans have been eating it for at least 8,000 years. We grow plants specifically to produce it. We breed them to make it stronger. We have competitions where people eat the hottest peppers they can find, and the winner is the one who does not quit. Some people cry, some people vomit. They keep going. They call it Funval," blinked all 3 eyes at once. "This is ethanol," Emma continued. "We make it from fruit, from grain, from potatoes, from rice, from almost anything that grows. We drink it at celebrations, at dinners, at weddings, at funerals. We have been fermenting it for over 10,000 years. There are humans who have spent their entire lives learning how to make the perfect bottle of wine. It is considered an art form." She moved to the next compound. "This is theobromine. We get it from a plant called cacao. We grind it and mix it with sugar and fat, and we call it chocolate. We give it to people we love. We give it to our children. We eat it when we are sad, and we eat it when we are happy. Here is the interesting part. We know it is poisonous. We know it kills our own pets. Our dogs can die from eating chocolate that we eat every single day, and we still eat it. We just keep it away from the dogs." Adrati, board member, leaned over to his colleague and whispered something. The translator could not catch it, but his 4 eyes were very wide. "This is caffeine," Emma said. "Humans consume it every morning. Almost every human on Earth starts their day with caffeine. If we do not have it, we get headaches, we get irritable, we cannot think clearly. We are so dependent on it that the withdrawal symptoms are a recognized medical condition. And we are completely fine with this. We love it. We build entire social rituals around it. We go to special buildings just to buy different versions of it." She pointed to the last compound, "And this is acetic acid. You call it a corrosive, we call it vinegar. We put it on our food, we splash it on fried potatoes, we mix it into sauces. We use it to preserve vegetables for the winter. It is in almost every kitchen on Earth." The room was silent. Zero was there. She had been allowed to attend as a student observer, and she sat in the corner with her datapad recording everything her antennae were straight up, and her dark eyes had not blinked in a very long time. She was not afraid anymore. She was fascinated in the way that scientists become fascinated when they find something that breaks every rule they have ever been taught. Renok was there too, standing in the back because the chairs were too small for him. He raised one massive handi. "Have a question," he said. "Volanadadar. Humans immune to chemistry." Emma laughed, and it was a real laugh, warm and sudden, and it surprised everyone in the room. "No," she said, "we are definitely not immune. These things affect us. Capsaicin makes our mouths burn and our eyes water. Ethanol makes us dizzy and clumsy, and if we drink too much, it can absolutely kill us. Caffeine makes our hearts race and our hands shake." "Then why?" Rennick asked. "Because we like it," Emma said. "Capsaicin triggers pain receptors in our mouths, and our brains respond by releasing chemicals that make us feel good. It's like a reward for being brave. Ethanol lowers our fear and makes us feel relaxed and social, and we use it to bond with each other. Caffeine makes us feel sharp and awake and ready. We did not evolve to avoid these things. We evolved to chase them." Rannoch stared at her for a very long time. "Your species feels pain," he said, and then goes back for more. Emma smiled. "Yeah," she said. "That's pretty much the whole story of humanity." The safety board deliberated for 2 hours. In the end, they ruled that Emma was not a threat and that she was allowed to remain on campus under one condition. All human food was to be consumed inside a sealed, ventilated dining pod designed to contain chemical vapor. Emma agreed. She was a little offended, but she understood as she left the hearing room Zero was waiting in the corridor. Her small dark form stood very still, and her antennae were angled forward, which meant she was curious. "Lieutenant Chen," she said. "You can call me Emma." "Emma," Zira said, and her translator gave the word a strange clicking quality. "I am writing a research paper on biochemical tolerances across sapient species. I was wondering if I could observe you during a meal for science." Emma looked at the small insectoid student who had been terrified of her lunch just 24 hours ago and who was now asking to watch her eat dinner. "Sure." Emma said. "Tomorrow is taco Tuesday." Zira tilted her head. "What is a taco?" Emma grinned. "Oh, you are going to love this." The dining pod was small and sealed, and had thick, transparent walls, so that everything inside could be seen from the outside. It had been designed for chemical containment, not for cooking, but Emma had made it work. She had set up a portable heating unit, a cutting board, and a row of ingredients that she had pulled from her personal ration supplies outside the pod. Zira stood with her datapad pressed against the glass. Her antennae were vibrating with excitement, and her dark eyes reflected the warm light from inside, where Emma was already chopping something green and shiny. She was not alone. Ranok stood behind her, his massive frame blocking the light from the corridor ceiling. His 4 eyes moved slowly across the ingredients on the counter, and his datapad was running a continuous chemical analysis of the air that leaked from the pod's ventilation seams. Next to him were 2 Vilshi students, a Kasori graduate researcher, and a young Saravan who had brought a camera drone that floated above his head like a nervous pet. By the time Emma started cooking, there were 14 students gathered outside the pod, and the number was growing. Emma looked up and saw the crowd. She smiled and gave a small wave. Then she held up a round, flat piece of dough. "This is a tortilla," she said loud enough for the external speaker to carry it. She put it on the heating surface, and it began to sizzle. Zira wrote tortilla, flat grain product. Appears SAFE on her datapad. Emma moved to the meat. It had been marinating overnight in a sealed bag, and when she opened it, the smell hit the ventilation system and traveled through the filtered output into the corridor. 3 students stepped back. Renok's scanner beeped. "Capsaicin detected," he said. "Concentration moderate. Also acetic acid and a sulfur compound consistent with garlic." Emma said. "It's garlic." She spread the meat on the heating surface, and it popped and hissed, and the smell grew stronger. A Palathi student in the back of the crowd made a distressed sound, but did not leave now the toppings. Emma said she held up a small green pepper. This is a jalapeno. It's spicy, but not too bad. She cut it into thin rings and put them in a bowl. Then she held up a different pepper, smaller, and bright orange. This, she said, is a habanero. She paused for effect. This one will make you cry. She diced the habanero and mixed it into a red salsa that she had already prepared. The scanner outside the pod immediately flagged it Class 7 capsaicin. Concentration, Rennick said out loud. The Vilshi students looked at each other. Emma kept going. She opened a container of sour cream, and the Kasori researcher raised a hand. What is that white substance? It's sour cream, Emma said. It's made from dairy, which comes from an animal on our planet. We take the milk and let bacteria ferment it. You let microorganisms colonize your food, the researcher said. Yes, Emma said, we do that a lot. Actually, we do it with bread and cheese and yogurt and beer and wine and kimchi and sauerkraut. And she stopped because the researcher's face had gone completely blank anyway. She said, it's delicious. She cut a lime in half and squeezed it over the meat. Rennick flinched. Citric acid, he said, that would dissolve my outer mineral layer in sustained contact. Good thing it's on my taco and not on you, Emma said. She assembled the first taco. Tortilla, then meat, then jalapenos, then habanero. Salsa, then sour cream, then a squeeze of lime, then a sprinkle of something green that she called cilantro. She picked it up with both hands and looked through the glass at the crowd. Ready? She asked. Ajira nodded so fast her antennae blurred. Emma took a bite. The crowd watched in total silence as she chewed. Her eyes closed for a moment, and she made a small sound that the translator interpreted as pleasure. She opened her eyes, and they were slightly wet. That's hot, she said. And then she took another bite. She was sweating. A thin line of moisture ran down the side of her face. She wiped it with her arm and kept eating. When she bit into a piece of habanero, her whole face tightened, and she sucked air through her teeth and made a sharp hissing sound. The Sarevan with the camera drone leaned forward. Is she in pain? Yes, Zira said. She is. Why is she still eating? Zira looked at her notes and then back at Emma, who was already assembling a second taco. I do not know yet, she said, but I intend to find out. Emma ate 3 tacos. She drank a cold beer with them, and the scanner flagged the ethanol content, and 2 students had to be talked out of calling security again. She finished the meal with churros, which were fried dough sticks coated in something called cinnamon sugar. Rennock scanner flagged the cinnamon. Immediate to listen damnly, he said. That compound is a registered irritant weapon on 4 worlds. Emma bit into the churro and closed her eyes and smiled. Rennock watched her, and for the first time in the entire evening, he put his scanner down between bites. Emma talked, she told them about food on Earth, about how every country and every culture had its own way of cooking, about how humans gathered around tables and shared meals and told stories. She told them about street food in Bangkok and barbecue in Texas and curry in Mumbai and pasta in Rome. She told them that food was not just fuel for humans. It was memory. It was love. It was identity. Rennock asked her a question that made the whole corridor go quiet. Do humans ever fear the things they eat? Emma stopped chewing. She thought about it for a real moment, not a quick answer, but a real one. Honestly, she said, we are more scared of bland food. Zira wrote that down and underlined it 3 times. The observation session was supposed to last 1 hour. It lasted 4. By the end, there were over 60 students and faculty watching, and someone had started a live stream on Galnet titled The Human Eats Death. It trended across 3 star systems within the hour. The xenobiology department head showed up and stood in the back with his arms folded, watching Emma explain the concept of desert to a group of students who could not believe that humans ate an entire second meal after the first one just because it was sweet. Emma was laughing and talking and demonstrating how to fold a tortilla properly when her datapad buzzed. She looked down at it, and her smile faded slightly. She read the message twice. It was from the Galactic Interspecies Safety Council. They had seen the stream. They had reviewed the chemical data. From the university, they had cross-referenced it with Terran biological profiles, and they wanted to reclassify humans not as a protected species, not as a diplomatic partner, as a Class 9 hazardous organism. Emma stared at the message for a long moment. The crowd outside the pod was still talking and laughing and pointing at the leftover salsa like it was a museum exhibit then. Emma started laughing. She laughed so hard she choked on a piece of churro and had to pound her own chest to clear it. She laughed until her eyes watered more than the habanero had made them water. Zira pressed her face closer to the glass. "Are you all right?" Emma held up the datapad so Zira could read it. Zira's antennae went completely flat. "Oh, no," she said. "Oh, yes," Emma said, still laughing. "This is going to be fun." She paused. "Everything on our planet tried to kill us. From the moment our species first stood up on two legs, we were surrounded by things that wanted us dead. So what did we do?" She looked at Zira, who was sitting in the front row with her datapad clutched to her chest. "We adapted. We learned which plants were poison, and then we learned how much poison we could eat before it hurt us. We learned that some poisons tasted good. We learned that some poisons made us feel alive. We learned that fire could kill us, and then we learned to cook with it. We learned that fermentation could rot food, and then we learned to make wine and bread and cheese from it." She looked at Renok. "Did not survive by avoiding danger. We survived by walking straight into it and figuring out how to make it work for us. That is what humans do. That is what we have always done." She picked up the small wrapped package from the table. "You want to know what makes humans dangerous? It is not that we eat capsaicin or drink ethanol. It is that we refuse to be afraid of the things that should kill us. Not because we are stupid, not because we are reckless, but because somewhere deep inside us, there is a voice that says, 'I am still here, and I am not done yet.'" She unwrapped the package. Inside was a small box, and inside the box were rows of carefully made chocolates, each one shaped differently, each one labeled with a tiny tag. She set the box on the table in front of Harry. "Spent the last 3 days working with the xenochemistry department," she said. "We analyzed the biochemistry of every species represented in this council. Every species in this room. These chocolates are made from Terran cacao, but they have been modified. Each one is safe for a different species. No theobromine toxicity, no allergenic compounds, no dangerous interactions." She pushed the box forward. "Where I come from, sharing food is how we say we trust you. It is how we say you are welcome at our table. It is how we say we are not a threat, we are a friend." Chamber was silent. Not the silence of fear, not the silence of shock, the silence of something shifting, something old and heavy moving aside to make room for something. Nazira stood up from her seat. She walked down the aisle to the floor of the chamber. Her small dark body moved between the tall figures of diplomats and officials, and no one stopped her. She reached the table and looked at the chocolates. She looked at Emma. Emma nodded. Zira reached out with one careful claw and picked up a chocolate tagged with the Palathi symbol. She held it for a moment. Then she put it in her mouth. Her antennae went straight up. Her dark eyes widened. She chewed slowly, and something changed in her face. Something that the translator could not capture, but that everyone in the room understood it, as she said, and she paused. "It is wonderful." Renok came next. His massive stone hand was surprisingly gentle as he picked up the piece marked for Dratty. He ate it in one bite, and his 4 eyes blinked in a pattern that his species used to express surprise and delight. One by one, the council members came forward. Even High Arbiter Sulan uncurled one of her 6 legs and delicately took a piece. She held it under her sensory plates for a long moment, and then she ate it. The reclassification motion was withdrawn. In its place, the council passed a new resolution: the establishment of the Terran Culinary Safety and Exchange Program, a formal initiative to adapt human foods for cross-species consumption and cultural exchange. The first program of its kind in galactic history. Emma sat back down and let out a long breath. She looked at Zira, who had returned to her seat and was writing furiously on her datapod. "What? Are you writing?" Emma asked. "My paper?" Zira said without looking up. That evening, Professor Kethvon sat alone in his office, updating his lecture notes. He scrolled through the section on Class 9 biochemical hazards and read the long list of compounds and their lethality rates and their documented effects on sapient species. He thought about Emma Chun eating ramen in the back of his classroom. He thought about the panic and the hazmat suits and the containment units. He thought about a young human woman standing in front of the most powerful safety council in the galaxy and offering them chocolate. He added a new footnote at the bottom of the section: exception, humans. See Appendix H. Seasoning. He saved the file and closed his datapad and sat in the quiet of his office for a long time. 3 weeks later, Zira published her paper. It was peer-reviewed and accepted by the Galactic Journal of Xenobiology within 6 days. It became the most downloaded study in the university's history, and it was cited in 412 subsequent papers across 9 disciplines within the first year. The title was They Eat Fire and Call It Flavor, a comprehensive study of Terran biochemical defiance. The dedication page had one line: "For Emma, who taught me that the bravest thing a species can do is sit down at a strange table and take the first bite." The hearing was held in the Grand Assembly Chamber of Valeth Prime, which was the largest room on the station, and it was full. Every seat was taken. Students sat in the upper galleries. Faculty lined the walls. Representatives from a dozen species filled the lower rows, and in the center of the room, a long curved table held the 7 members of the Galactic Interspecies Safety Council, each one wearing the silver sash of their office. At one end of the floor sat the Terran delegation ambassador. David Okafor was a tall man with deep brown skin and calm, steady eyes, who spoke the way mountains stand. He sat with his hands folded, and his face gave away nothing. Next to him sat Emma. She was wearing her dress uniform for the first time since arriving on the station, and she had a small wrapped package on the table in front of her. The head of the Safety Council was a Rathani named Arbiter Sulan. She had 6 legs and a long, segmented body covered in iridescent blue plates, and when she spoke, her voice carried across the chamber like a low bell. "We are here to consider the reclassification of the species known as Homo sapiens," she said. "Under Section 14 of the Galactic Biological Safety Code, a species may be designated as a Class 9 hazardous organism if it demonstrates an innate resistance to or habitual interaction with Class 9 biochemical compounds. We believe the evidence supports this designation." She turned to the council. "Present the case." A Kesori scientist stood and activated a holographic display. The same molecules from Professor Kethvon's lecture appeared in the air, but this time they were overlaid with data pulled from Terran biological records. "The species, known as humans," she said, "regularly consumes capsaicin, ethanol, theobromine, caffeine, acetic acid, and allyl isothiocyanate, among dozens of other compounds classified as lethal by this council. They do so willingly and with apparent enjoyment. They carry these substances on their persons in portable containers. They prepare them in specialized facilities they call kitchens. They feed them to their young." A murmur moved through the chamber. "Furthermore," the scientist continued, "humans have demonstrated an ability to survive exposure to nearly every Class 9 compound in our database at concentrations that would be fatal to the majority of sapient species. They have evolved specific biological mechanisms to process these substances, including specialized liver enzymes, enhanced mucus membrane protection, and a neurological pain response that triggers a reward cycle." She paused. "In simple terms, humans eat poison, and their brains reward them for it." Murmur became a rumble. "We therefore recommend," the Kesori continued, "that humans be reclassified as Class 9 hazardous organisms, with all associated containment and interaction protocols applied across council member worlds." The chamber erupted. Voices overlapped in a dozen languages. Translators struggled to keep up students. In the gallery, leaned over the railings, Ambassador Okafor stood. The room went quiet. He did not speak immediately. He looked around the chamber at every face, every species, every pair of eyes or sensors or antennae that was turned toward him, and then he smiled. "I appreciate the council's thoroughness," he said. His voice was deep and unhurried. "I want to respond to a few points." He gestured to the holographic display. "You say humans are resistant to Class 9 compounds. This is true. But if resistance to dangerous substances is the standard for hazardous classification, then I must ask why the Drati are not on this list." He looked at Renuk, who was sitting in the student gallery. Drati biology is silicon-based. They are immune to sulfuric acid. They can survive in environments that would dissolve the flesh of most species in this room. Should we classify them as hazardous organisms? Renok blinked. All four. Isokafer continued. "The Vilshi breathe fluorine, a gas so reactive that it is used as an industrial solvent on most worlds. Should we reclassify them? The Serevan can survive radiation levels that would kill a human in minutes. Are they hazardous?" The council members shifted in their seats. "The truth," he said, "is that every species in this galaxy is dangerous to some other species. That is what it means to be alive. You do not reclassify life. You learn to live alongside." I sat down. Sulon looked at him for a long moment and then turned to Emma. "Lieutenant Chen," she said, "you have been at the center of this matter since it began. Do you wish to speak?" Emma stood up. She was not a diplomat. She was not a scientist. She was a junior officer who had been on this station for less than a week and had caused an interstellar incident by eating lunch, but she had something to say. She looked out at the chamber, and she took a breath. "I grew up on a planet called Earth," she said. "You have it in your records. You probably have it listed as a Class 3 or Class 4 hazardous world, and that is probably fair. Earth is not a gentle place. The air is a mix of nitrogen and oxygen, which is corrosive. The weather includes hurricanes and tornadoes and floods and droughts and ice storms. The surface is covered in predators from bacteria to bears. The plants produce thorns and toxins and allergens. The oceans are full of creatures that can sting, paralyze, crush, and swallow you whole. Even the geology tries to kill us: earthquakes, volcanoes, tsunamis, asteroid impacts that wiped out entire species before we even existed.